Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome once again to Advocacy Talks for March 2023. We are delighted this month to welcome Professor Tom Cooney, who's the Professor of Entrepreneurship at the Technological University Dublin. Tom is also the Director of the Institute of Minority Entrepreneurship, an adjunct professor at the University of Turku in Finland. He has designed and currently delivers, in conjunction with AIB and the Open Doors Initiative, the only tailored entrepreneurship course targeted at people with disabilities in Ireland. Tom is also a policy advisor to governments, European Commission, OECD and other international organisations, and he is the director of 4 enterprises and works in various capacities with a range of businesses. Tom has published 11 books and presented widely on the topic of minority entrepreneurship. If you're interested in further details about Tom, you can visit his website on www.thomascooney, that's COONEY.ie. So today Tom's going to be presenting on self-employment for people with disabilities. And please be aware that this is a recorded session that will be up on NCBI's website and our social media channels. During the course of Tom's presentation, you can put any questions you have into the chat, and I will present those to Tom at the end of his presentation. Great to have you here today, Tom, and thank you for visiting us with an Advocacy Talk 6 months. Over to you.
Liz, thank you very much indeed for the invitation and for that very kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be part of the Advocacy Talks, something that I strongly believe in, because we need people, we need organizations to start, I was going to say talking, but I think we've come to the time of shouting for change to happen, because government certainly isn't listening with regard to self-employment or even indeed employment for people with disabilities. So while my conversation talk generally will be around self-employment for people with disabilities, there will be times when I will focus more on the challenges facing people with visual impairment in terms of self-employment. I'm just going to share with you for a moment some of the work that I've been doing in recent times, not sort of give myself any clap on the back, but to give you a sense of where I come from in all of this. I'm a white male, balding white male in my 60s and early 60s, let it be noted. But it's, and my background, I suppose, is that where I've enjoyed privilege in many ways across my life, and certainly it gives me a opportunity, to live a life in a particular way that not everyone has the same opportunity. I was fortunate enough to have wonderful parents who were very strong on the notion that we are all equal, and that if I meet a king, then I don't need to bow my head, and equally if I meet someone who's struggling, you offer a hand to give, to help them up. And my work has kind of reflected that in that I am focused on minority entrepreneurship, inclusive entrepreneurship, as my main area of expertise. For example, I work with the OECD. I've just submitted a report to them yesterday on the challenges in terms of inclusive entrepreneurship in this country. By inclusive entrepreneurship, what I mean is people from disadvantaged or minority communities who are from communities such as immigrants, seniors, people with disabilities, travellers, ex-offenders, and other communities. Now, sometimes within that, women broadly are included, but that's because they are underrepresented in terms of entrepreneurial activity. And that's one that's often debated, whether they should or should not be included. The OECD would include them. But last year, 2 years ago, I published a book called The Palgrave Handbook of Minority Entrepreneurship. And the previous year to that, in 2020, I published 2 reports, one called The Pathway to Entrepreneurship for People with Disabilities in Ireland, and the other was Supporting People from Marginalised Communities into Employment. And in that one, we particularly looked at migrants, marginalised youth, and people with disability. In that last report, Supporting People from Marginalised Communities into Employment, it was very obvious that one of the big challenges facing people from disadvantaged communities is that while there might be a vast range of initiatives and supports available to people from these communities seeking employment or self-employment, it is extraordinarily difficult to understand how to get the information and who is doing what for whom, where. And depending on where you live, the offer will be different. So there's somewhat of a postcode lottery in terms of the supports that might be available to you, either into employment or self-employment. And so my work has tried to focus on supporting people from disadvantaged communities into self-employment, because that's my area of expertise, and offering that option in terms of generating income and putting food on the table. I'm not suggesting for one moment that self-employment is the answer to everyone's problems, but I'm certainly arguing that the option should be more widely available to people from marginalised communities. And particularly, I would argue that people with disabilities, given that remote working and assistive technologies are now more widely available, that opportunity is now probably at its best time for people with disability, and we need to make people aware of that. Here's some background that many people outside of the community do not appreciate. First of all, there are over 643,000 people in Ireland with a disability, according to the 2016 census. We're still waiting for last year's census data to be released, but we know that approximately 13.5% of the population have disability. Now, when I mentioned this to some friends some time ago, they didn't believe me that the percentage of the population with disability was so high. But then, as somebody commented, I only understand disability when I see it. And they didn't recognize all the different types of disability and all the different forms that it can take that may not be visible. And therefore, people with disability may struggle because, as my friend said, because I don't see it in front of me. What we also know is that only 1/3 of the working age population are employed. We have the 4th lowest employment rate for people with disability in the European Union, something that we should be ashamed of as a statistic. Indeed, we also know that the rate of pay for people with disability is extraordinarily low. So, the community is struggling because of employment opportunities. And even when given or when successful in applying for employment opportunities, that the rate of pay on offer is lower than what other people in mainstream society might be offered. So there's lots of inequities in the system. What we also know from the statistics is that people with disability are less likely to have higher levels of education. That, as I said, the rate of employment is lower, the rate of pay is lower, which obviously then means that the possibility of living in poverty is higher, and the nature of and the possibility of living a kind of a marginalized lifestyle are also quite higher. So we've got to change this, right? And as I highlight in my next point, they're more likely to experience poverty and social exclusion. And so a lot of this stems from an early age, an early disadvantage through the education system. Okay, and then even when employment is secure based on the abilities of a person, the rates of pay can be lower. This creates obviously a challenge, which I'll talk about in a moment, in terms of self-employment, because if a person is in a low-paid job, then it means they have less ability to save money that they could put into a future business. It also means that they're less likely to be in a managerial position, which has its own consequences for people who are looking to set up their own business. So the challenges just mount and mount, and we've got to find a way of breaking past those challenges and creating a more equitable future for everyone in society. What is interesting from the CSO, and I had to dig deep to get these numbers because they're not easily found. Actually, I only got them by special request, but over 17,500 people with disability are self-employed with employees, and almost 35,000 are self-employed with no employees. So already we know that there's quite a lot of people with disability who are self-employed, who are making it happen. But unfortunately, as role models, okay, they're not highlighted in the media as role models and as examples of what can be achieved. We know little about them. And interestingly, in the course that I delivered last year, the feature of having a guest entrepreneur each week, and with a different person each week, was one of the highlights of the course, as feedback from the course participants told us. They said that having somebody talk to us about their experiences, about the challenges that they overcame, meant that they could now believe that a future as being self-employed was possible because other people had gone before them. What are the motivations then for self-employment? Well, one motivation is that it's out of necessity, entrepreneurship, because if you are unable to get a job and you're looking at your income options, then it's either employment, self-employment, or social welfare supports. And therefore, people wish to be self-sustaining. And if they can't get a job, will decide, okay, I'm going to create my own job. So some of it may be out of what we call necessity entrepreneurship. But it also, other motivations could be, the desire to overcome disability. So we would talk to entrepreneurs who do not want to talk on the course because they do not want to be seen as an entrepreneur, with a disability, but just simply as an entrepreneur. And they don't want the label, for the want of a better phrase, and they don't want to be viewed as a champion for the community, but instead they view themselves as an entrepreneur just getting on with their business. Another point is the wish to increase income, because we do know that rates of pay in a job are quite low. Obviously, if someone is receiving social welfare benefit, then there is a ceiling in terms of the amount of income that will generate. And the perception is that being self-employed gives people the opportunity to increase the potential income that they can generate for themselves and their families. The downside to that, obviously, is that you are giving up certain income with a job or by receipt of social welfare benefit for uncertain income in terms of being self-employed, something we'll discuss more in the next slide. Another motivation for self-employment is it allows greater flexibility in terms of working hours and workload. And this may suit people in terms of the nature of their disability and also the nature of where they work from. So it allows people to work the hours that they choose. And again, I come back to the notion of remote working, so that you're working from home or you're working from a location that suits your needs rather than the needs of an employer. And also the workload varies or can be varied depending on one's own health circumstances. So the freedom to choose when to work and how to work is very important in terms of self-employment. And again, I come back to remote working and assistive technologies, enabling people to achieve that goal in a way that was never possible before. It should also be noted that when you work on a, from home on a laptop, and people who are your customers, your clients, your suppliers, other people involved in the business activity do not know or do not need to know, or it's your choice regarding whether you choose to declare or state, or whether it matters that you have a disability. For many people, it allows them to remain invisible in some ways with regard to the nature of their disability, or the fact that they have a disability. And instead, it's just a company that is providing a service without anything being known about the background of the person involved in that business. And in some ways, people believe that creates a more equal playing pitch, because negative perceptions that a client or customer might have are no longer there because they don't know who they're working with. One of the great benefits of self-employment is the notion of rebuilding self-esteem. The notion that a person is capable of generating their own income, and you're building a wealth based on their capabilities rather than on what society might label as a disability. Timothy Shriver, the CEO of Special Olympics Worldwide, used the phrase diffabilities, which he often talked about as being different abilities rather than disabilities. The other thing that self-employment offers is that it accommodates people in terms of location, the point that I touched on earlier. The notion of transport to and from employment is reduced because you choose your workplace. You choose when and where to meet with people, whether that's online or in person. And so it accommodates one's disability in a multitude of ways. And the final motivation for self-employment is that many people fear discrimination in the workplace with some justification, because what we found in the statistics following COVID is that people with disability were disproportionately affected by unemployment during COVID. And what we know from the economic crisis of 2008 to 2012 was, again, people with disability were disproportionately affected by that, in terms of employment, or effectively unemployment, during that period. And also, they found that it took them longer to get back into the labour market once the crash was over and the economy started to rebuild. So not only are they, are the people from the community first to leave, but also they're last back in. Not quite that stark, but close enough. So given those issues, given those kind of areas of discrimination, the fear of discrimination in the workplace is well founded, and can be a motivation for some people with regard to self-employment. We also know that, in employment there are ceilings or barriers to progression, and that in itself can encourage people to set up their own business where they can take care of their own progression and growth. But in any program that I've been involved in, we've been really clear in terms of the barriers to self-employment. We do not paint a rosy picture that this is the solution to everyone's problems, because that would be immoral in many ways and certainly incorrect. What we know to be some of the barriers to self-employment is that people starting up a business, people with disabilities starting a business, are more likely to have low levels of employment and low levels of managerial experience. And what that means is that you're going to have less experience and expertise and industry knowledge that assists anyone, that's of value to anyone when starting their own business. So you're starting from a point of disadvantage because you do not have the same experiences as somebody who has had employment opportunities that allowed them to be a manager, that allowed them to experience a variety of industries, that allowed them, to build an expertise that may not have been possible for people with disability. Obviously, there's also, for some people, difficulties with movement and accessibility. People with visual impairment, people in a wheelchair, may experience such difficulties. And simple things like meeting with customers or networking, so going to the local chambers of commerce meeting, or going to some business networking event, is more challenging for someone with a disability than it would be for someone without a disability. Something that, the majority of the population would take for granted can become a difficulty for a person with a disability. And networking and meeting with customers is important in terms of building growth, building a business. As mentioned earlier, rates of employment are low, but also the rates of pay are extremely low, which creates a problem with regard to credit rating. People with disability have difficulties with saving for disposable income because of reduced levels of pay, but also because of the medical costs that having a disability incurs. A report last year, I'm sure that many of you will be aware of, highlighted that having a disability costs in the region of €30,000 per year on average. So therefore, there's that additional cost plus the lower levels of income, which means that the opportunity to have high levels of disposable income or to create a pool of money to start a business is less likely. And that also means that you're going to have a poor credit rating with the bank. And again, that is unhelpful when looking for funding to start one's own business. The biggest challenge by some distance, not only in Ireland, but this is found, I can't say definitively in every country in the world, but in in pretty much any international study I've ever read, the number one challenge for people with disabilities starting their own business has been the same in every study, and that is the fear of losing regular benefit income, what's known internationally as the welfare benefit trap. And this is quite a rational fear to have, because a person is in receipt of certain income, that being the welfare benefits that they would receive, which may include a medical card, it may include housing benefit, in addition to the disability benefit and other benefits that they may be entitled to receive. So a person will have this certain income and they're being asked to give it up for an uncertain income. And unfortunately, our welfare system is generally a binary type system, in that, what I mean by that is you can either work or you cannot work, is how the system is viewed. And what it doesn't recognize so easily is how people can change from being able to work and, to not being able to work and go back again, okay, over different time periods. So someone with a disability may be in a position to start up their own business in a particular point in time, may work on that for some time, but then due to health issues or health concerns, may need to step back from the business to recover their health. But getting back into receipt of social welfare payments is extremely challenging. And therefore, this notion of, is it worth it? And also, if I earn so much money, does that mean I stop getting the benefits? And what if I don't make the same amount of money next month? What happens to my social welfare benefit? And particularly people are concerned about medical card and housing allowances. So there are justifiable fears that people have concerning the receipt of certain income, and encouraging them away from that, is not something that should be taken lightly. There is the Back to Work Enterprise Allowance scheme that provides 100% of your welfare benefit in year one. And then in year two, it's 75%. But this is when you start up your own business. But from year three onwards, it goes to zero. So you fall off a cliff effectively after year two. And this can be of grave concern to many people. I would also argue that support agencies, particularly enterprise support agencies, but even advocacy agencies, do not truly understand the distinctive challenges faced by people with disability when starting their own business. I've frequently argued that people with disability endure additional and distinctive challenges when starting their own business. Everybody faces challenges when starting their own business. Everybody, it doesn't matter their background. There are business challenges in starting one's own business. But people from minority communities, and particularly people with disability, face additional and distinctive challenges that are not recognised by support agencies. And I would argue that frequently, the disability advocacy organizations equally do not promote or do not recognize self-employment as an option, and do not promote or do not understand the additional challenges faced. And finally, one of the barriers to self-employment is the lack of access to appropriate training and support. Until TU Dublin, in conjunction with the Open Doors Initiative, launched the self-employment program, the online self-employment program in 2021, until that point, there was no tailored support for people with disability in Ireland in terms of starting their own business. And unfortunately, we still remain the only program, and we only run it once a year due to funding issues. And so we remain the only source of tailored support for people with disability seeking to start up their own business in Ireland. So that lack of access to appropriate training and support is also a barrier to self-employment. If anyone's interested in doing the course, let me just talk a little bit about it. We ran a pilot project between September 2021 and December 2021. It's a 12-week course. Because the pilot project was so successful, we secured funding from AIB for to run the course for 3 years. And so we ran it from September 22 to December 22. And we will be running it again this coming September for 12 weeks again. And in those 12 weeks, we basically take participants through the important elements of starting one's own business. So we look at things like idea generation and evaluation, customer segmentation, customer relationships, okay, and financing, testing your ideas, legal matters. All of that is hugely important. But we also have, as you might see in lecture 6, is balancing business and personal well-being. And that's a lecture that has been really well received, where we talk about the notion that you are not your business, that your business is important, but you've also got to look after yourself. So how do you balance the well-being of your business with the well-being of your own health? So we take a very holistic approach to starting your own business. We also have great supporters in delivering this course. Obviously, AIB, our sponsor, and Open Doors Initiative are our partners in this since the beginning. But the local enterprise offices provide mentors for the course participants. I should have mentioned that there is a limit of 20 people on the course, and we've had, between 35 to 38 applicants for the 2 years that we've run the program. But we max at 20 participants, and we make the selection based on the quality of the business idea. Again, I should note that we only accept people with a business idea. So you must have a business idea already, but you cannot have started the business. So what we're looking to achieve is give people an opportunity to evaluate their business idea in a safe and supportive environment. We use an online learning tool called SimVenture Validate. It's from the UK, but it's an excellent tool that basically gives you a series of questions under each of the headings in the course structure. And each week you've got homework to do, and you just answer the questions online. I should also say that each lecture, it's a 2-hour lecture. The first hour is where we have course we deliver content relating to the topic. It's from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock every Wednesday. So from 11 to 12, there's the lecture. From 12 to 12:30, we have a guest entrepreneur, somebody with a disability who started up their own business. And then from 12:30 to 1 o'clock, we have an expert, given the topic of that day. So we bring in legal experts, we bring in experts from the banks, we bring in someone from the local enterprise offices, we bring in someone from the Department of Social Protection to talk about, what monies you might gain or lose if you start your own business. So it's a very honest conversation, and we don't hide the truth. We don't try to sell something that is unrealistic. I do not expect 20 people to start a business at the end of the course. If we get 5 or 6 people, that would be the highest that we might expect, because it's not about maximizing the number of startups. It's about giving people the opportunity to evaluate their business idea. And as I've often said, if it's a bad business idea, it's a bad business idea. It doesn't matter the background of that person, of the promoter of the business idea. So we're not going to go, oh, because you're on this course, we're going to support you just because you're on this course. If your idea is not viable on a long-term basis, we're going to call it as such. We also provide online another tool called Do Learn Finance, which enables you to create your own financial projections, which is really important. We got support from advocacy organisations like Disability Federation of Ireland, who provide promotional support. And as I said earlier, we've got guest speakers each week. So we've had people like Mark Pollock, who would be quite well known, Derek Walker in Donegal has a business called Nat Newt. Derek has visual impairment, and he has a company that makes natural juices and employs 7 people and is very successful. So we invite a range of speakers, both from home and abroad. Debbie Adams from Canada is a wonderful speaker. Debbie also has visual impairment and talks about the challenges that created for her and how it influenced her thinking, and then how she changed that to become self-employed and what she has achieved since. So the business model canvas is how we work through your business plan. And the great thing about the approach that we take is that you work on it each week. So on week 1, you'll work on customer segment. On the top right corner of the screen is customer segment. And basically you're given some questions within the system that you answer. And then that provides the information that becomes evident there on the screen. But also it leads to the creation of a larger business plan that you then submit at the end of the year as part of your assignments. But it also means that you've got a business plan. If you go to the local enterprise office looking for support, or if you go to a bank looking for support, your business plan is already written. And so there are 10 elements to this business model canvas, and we work our way through those on a week-by-week basis. So there's nothing overwhelming in terms of the approach that we take. You're not left in a situation 2 weeks from the end of the course where you suddenly go, oh, I must write my business plan. Because we record every lecture, it also means that course participants can listen to the lecture recording at a time and space that best suits them. The lecture notes are also available on the course website. So people, even if they miss a lecture, and that regularly happens because of health issues, then they can step out for a week or 2 weeks. But when they come back or in their own time and space at home, I should highlight it's an online course. So last year we had we had people from 9 counties. Okay, so we had Cork, Galway, Leitrim, Louth, quite a few from Dublin, Tipperary, Waterford. So that gives you an idea of the spread of the counties that we had last year. And it means you can work from home in taking the course. You can follow the course in your own time and space. You can also do the assignments in your own time. You can write up your business plan, which forms the assignments, in your own time. And if one has health issues, you can step out and step back in as appropriate. Just to give you some information on the course pilot, because we're still coming to gathering the information on the second course, but with 20 participants with 38 applications, and there's no verification needed regarding disability. We just ask people to self-identify. It's worth noting that the range of disabilities was extraordinarily wide and covered cognitive, physical, and other forms of disability. So there was no particular form of disability that was predominant. It was really, really quite varied. People who took the course, it's a continuing professional development course. It's level 6 in terms of the national qualifications. And if you complete the assignments and pass the course, you get 5 ECTS credits. As mentioned earlier, the use of role models, successful entrepreneurs with disability, was an extraordinary success, and certainly one that all participants on both courses talked about quite positively. As students of TU Dublin, participants have access to student services support, including our disability support services. Now, I haven't written it here for obvious reasons, but I will say that where we are struggling in the first 2 courses is people with visual impairment are finding it more difficult to navigate our systems than other course participants. And also to gain the support of the disability support services, an interview needs to take place. But because that is happening in September, when large numbers of people require interviews to confirm the nature of their disability, and it means that there's quite a backlog. And for someone on a 12-week course, it means that they're close to the end of the course before it's confirmed. Now, if someone's on a 4-year program, okay, then the effect is less impactful. But if you're on a 12-week course, then not getting an assessment for 4 to 6 to 8 weeks obviously has huge impact. So one part of our operations on our pilot course is that we must improve our service for people with visual impairment, and that's where I put my hands up and say we're not doing well enough there, and changes need to happen, which will be addressed in the next or prior to the next program. As previously mentioned, lectures are recorded and people can watch them again. And at the end of the course, what we do is we have a Dragon's Den type event where people who choose to pitch their idea to an evaluation panel can do so. And it's a wonderful event. This year we held it, last December, we held it in AIB headquarters, and 7 people pitched to the Dragons, and we also awarded the certificates at the end of the course, and it was a wonderful event. On both courses to date, approximately 6 people have either started or will start their own business, which is higher than expected. And we're really pleased with that. But as I mentioned previously, it's not all about getting people to start their own business. What has taken us by surprise, and a nice surprise, is the feedback on both programs have told us that one's self-esteem has been boosted tremendously from taking the course, that they felt listened to, they felt as if someone cared, and that even if they weren't going to start their own business, they felt more empowered to go back into the labour market, and they felt that their prospects of employment were much greater now than they were prior to starting their course. So there were those self-confidence and self-esteem improvements that people talked about that we hadn't anticipated, but obviously we're delighted, and now we're building on that. So look, finally, just one final slide. If you are deciding to start a business, please know that our next program begins in September, and you're welcome to apply. And you need to decide on issues like, what legal structure will you use for your business? Is it going to be a limited company? Are you going to be a sole trader? What's the difference? What legal implications and tax implications does that have? How will you get funding? So will you get funding from your own money or family and friends? Do you need to go to the bank? Can you get grants from organizations? If you have credit difficulties, or if you've a poor credit rating, okay, who can help you in terms of improving your access to finance? One of the guest speakers on our course has been the CEO of Microfinance Ireland, and Microfinance Ireland lend to people who are starting a business who have been unable to secure finance from a bank, and they offer what's known as soft loans. And a soft loan would be where the terms of repayment would be easier or softer than you might get from a bank. So that's Microfinance Ireland. What are the issues surrounding tax, PRSI, and employing staff? That's something that's dealt with in our legal issues lecture. And finally, where do you go to get advice on starting a business? Because one of the problems, as mentioned earlier, is there are so many people involved in helping to start a business in Ireland that it can be difficult to understand who's doing what for whom and where. My one piece of advice to anyone who's starting a business is talk to your local enterprise office. Every city and county has a local enterprise office. If you go to localenterprise.ie, you will find the nearest local enterprise office to you, and they should always be the first people you talk to when starting your own business. So I hope that's given you a good overview of the challenges, the motivations, and the possibilities that exist for a person with a disability who is looking to become self-employed. I'm not selling it as the solution to everyone's problem, but I certainly want it to become an option that more and more people are talking about in terms of generating income and future careers. So with that, I'll stop the presentation and I'll take any questions that you might have.
Tom, thank you for a wonderful presentation, an honest evaluation of all the challenges for people seeking employment, but also you've described some excellent pathways, the course that you're running and the people that you're bringing into that course to encourage and inspire others to take up the challenge. You do have some questions. You've already covered some of them in your comprehensive presentation. The first one that comes to mind right away is, can you tell us about some of the success stories of disabled entrepreneurs? And you mentioned one that I heard about on television, the juice,
yeah,
they
Derek
were on
is
TV once, yes.
yeah, Derek is a wonderful guy, and now Derek was not one of our program participants. He was one of our guest entrepreneurs who spoke to us about his story, and he was very open about his challenges that he faced, um, you know, with visual impairment, and in his early life, and then in terms of becoming a business person, and he describes what it's done for him in terms of how he views himself,
Yeah.
and the confidence that it's given him, and he's got a marvelous business, and that's what he's known for, but so some of the examples of success that we've had is, for example, we had someone in 2021 who set up a company where they're writing scripts and such for film and TV companies. And he spoke to, as a past participant, he spoke to the more recent cohort, and he was talking to them from Cannes. He was at a film festival there. So that was delightful because, we couldn't have scripted that any better. Come to us live from Cannes is last year's participant. And look, and it varies widely in terms of the nature of startups. So there's quite a lot of apps in there. One person in year one received €100,000 in funding for the development of her app, which was about mental well-being for people suffering from gaslighting. And yeah, then we had another person who was selling pre-loved clothes, and particularly targeted at people with disability, because the nature of the clothes were ones that could be utilized by people maybe with physical disabilities, and so getting on and off clothes might be a challenge for some people, particularly fasteners, buttons, and it was making clothing more accessible for people. And so those are kind of the different types of startups that we've been having, but it's been quite varied. One of the challenges we've had, Liz, is that people who discover that, because they have a mentor, because the mentor's working with them, they do come to realization along the way that actually my idea may not be viable. It might be, there might be a market for it, but the market isn't big enough for me to have a long-term life, or livelihood rather. And when that happens, it's obviously a dream that somebody has, and now it's gone. And sometimes the reaction can be quite negative on that, and sometimes people might kind of hit out because they're just, the dream is gone, and we got to be understanding of that moment, and understanding that, look, they're not cross with us, they're cross at the fact that the dream is no longer possible. And in situations where the business can be reshaped or reworked, we would talk to people about that as well. But it's really important to note that we're not looking for everybody to start up a business, because we don't believe that's the right way to go about it. If it's not viable, it's not viable, whoever you are.
Thanks, Tom. And that, I guess when I hear you talking about people, the disappointment of an idea not coming to fruition, I guess ordinary everyday people without a disability also have similar dreams that when they start working through them, they realize they're not pursuable out there. So, but yes, I guess the very fact of you acknowledging the disappointment and supporting them through that moment is important. Another aspect that's been spoken here, a few questions about, you talked about accessing information, who were getting that information even to start with, about how does somebody know where to begin. You've mentioned the local the local offices where people can go? Anywhere else that people can go where they need to get some mentoring initially?
Well, again, the mentors would come through the local enterprise offices primarily, but I would also suggest to people that they would check in with their local development company. So the ILDN.ie, that's it's what is it, Ireland's Local Development Network. Yeah, .ie, ILDN.ie. And basically, local development companies are enterprises or organizations within localities across the country who work with people from disadvantaged backgrounds to support them into employment or self-employment. And there are quite a lot of programs being run around self-employment, but the downside to them is that they are hit and miss in terms of where you're located. So some, depending on where you are, you might have a program starting, but in other places it's not going to it's not going to be there. So it's a bit of a lottery, and which is something that we've talked about in the past. That it should be equitable, and that's not happening at the moment. But look, local development companies, ILDN, okay, they specialise in disadvantaged communities. Working with disadvantaged communities is another option, but the local enterprise one is your starting point.
Perfect. That's perfect. I was interested to hear specifically about people, students with or participants with a vision impairment at the university, getting the assessment for support from a university, student support. And I'm wondering what the lead time is from when you take on someone is accepted into your course to them actually starting, and whether that would reduce the issue around them actually being assessed for student support within the university, having been in that role myself as a disability support officer. Yeah.
Actually, that's a great idea, Liz, and indeed, I've organised a meeting next month with our disability support services to address this, because the reaction to the course has been overwhelmingly positive. But I have noted that the people, because they've spoken to me, they've emailed me, and I've phoned them to discuss the matter. That they have struggled most. People with visual impairment have struggled most on the program. That it takes them too long to get into our system. It takes them too long to get assessed, and therefore to get appropriate supports. And that like we've made all the materials through the principles of universal design for learning. And we try to be appropriate in all that we do, but we're still not managing it in terms, specifically for people with visual impairment. And we've included note takers, and other supports have been offered, but we're not getting it right yet. And I put my hands up on that one. But I'm very conscious that it's something we need to address.
And it often is, Tom, isn't it, that lead time when if it's flagged immediately once somebody is accepted into the course, they're prioritized because the course is starting soon rather than next term or next year. They're prioritized with the disability support officers within the universities, because for people with a vision impairment, the accommodations they need are reasonably fairly the same and standard in many ways. It will be note takers or access to Braille or whatever accommodations they need for paperwork or coursework online. It's fairly standard. So I think it's getting them in the queue of the disability support officers, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think up to now, the decision to accept people happens in the first week of September, and the program starts on the third week. So we're still registering people like a week out. So I think we're going to have a deadline sometime in July and allow ourselves August to get all that background work done properly. I think that might be our solution. I note, Liz, some other questions, and I'm happy to take, like, how do you encourage current entrepreneurs with disabilities to actively engage with mainstream?
Very important. I wanted to, because I knew that would be a big one for you. Very important that it's great to have those entrepreneurs, but the very fact that they're reluctant to identify as a person with a disability. So I'm wondering, there's a couple of questions on that. Is it stigma, or what do we do about it?
First of all, it's stigma, and the perception that they're going to be treated differently. And by different would be negative different rather than positive different. And then there's just a sense that, people don't want to be viewed as being disabled or don't want the label, right? And they just want to be, Tom or Liz or, whatever their name might be, and that, so they, they don't want to be known as an entrepreneur with a disability, but just an entrepreneur, without the disability bit. But I think ultimately it's around the perception that there will be, some disadvantage to it, and that people may perceive that the service or product that they offer may not be of the same quality because, of whatever imaginary perception that somebody has around people with disability, and the negatives that can go with that. Now, what I would say is that in terms of engaging with mainstream, right, what we have noticed, not just with the people with disability community, but also with all minority communities, is that prior to starting up one's own business, there are certainly additional and distinctive challenges that need to be recognized. But once the business is up and running, right, it's more, the playing field becomes much more level, right? Because we've run grow your own business programs, right? And what we found is that, the issues then are pretty similar. Where do I get good staff? How do I pay them? How do I find more markets? How do I grow the business? How do I, and the nature of the disadvantage, okay, had dissipated. So what I would say to people is that the nature of the disadvantage is greater prior to starting up and at the startup. But once you're up and running, a lot of that disadvantage is not the same, and it's, at that stage it's much more level, and people are much more into the product or service that you offer now. Okay, and therefore being part of the chambers of commerce, being part of other networks, whether online or offline, become important, and therefore I would encourage people to engage with mainstream organizations and be yourself, because now it's about the business.
And that's a really good encouraging aspect, isn't it? That once it's up and running, all the playing field becomes much more level. I think you've answered the next one about the mentoring issue, but the next one there, if you have time, Tom, what's the solution to resolving the welfare benefit trap that you mentioned?
Oh yeah, let's finish with the easy one, right? Until such time as government recognizes that it's not a either or situation, we're struggling, right? Until such time as recognition that this notion of you either can work or can't work, and that there needs to be recognition of a continuum where people move between one and the other and back again over time, and the system needs to allow for people to move in and out, without the same difficulties that currently exist. So if you set up your own business and you become successful, but then have a relapse, or the nature of your disability means you need to take time out, what happens for those 2 or 3 months, right? And how can you survive during that period, which is a legitimate concern. And we need to find the solution. And one of the solutions that they have in for example, in Finland, is the notion of was it universal basic income, where everyone gets the same amount universally. Like not but as a minimum, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, how you get that and when you get that, varies depending on your circumstances. And so we've got to reimagine the welfare system, and I can't see that happening anytime soon, unfortunately.
I think we need to reimagine that for everyone, actually, that we don't withhold support for people for X amount of time, whether with a disability or not, and to make them, they're spiraling down when they lose employment. We rather look at it as giving early intervention quickly to sustain people, so they don't go down a spiral downwards of of all sorts of issues, being unemployed. So I think we could apply those rules to both people with the disabilities and anyone who becomes unemployed.
Yeah, I think unfortunately what happens is that the design of the system is to prevent abuse of the system, and that there are a minority of people who are looking to exploit the system through its abuse. And then unfortunately, the vast majority of people who are deserving of the support, suffer.
Yes.
And I think all designs are built around avoiding abuse rather than supporting appropriate intervention.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Tom. That's exactly, the system has a negative outlook on people that are unemployed generally, as if the suspicion is you might roar at the system, rather than the percentage is going to happen anywhere. In any system, it's going to have that aspect to it. We've come to the, we could ask you lots of more questions. I'm sure I would like to know, when you talk about the course, how do people, do they go online to apply for your course? Can they call up and get more information about it first? How can they do that, Tom?
So we will be advertising again. It's closed at the moment, and we will be advertising in June and July. And what? So first of all, if people take my email, which is thomas.cooney@tudublin.ie, and Liz, I'm happy for you to share that with people.
Thank you. Yeah, we will.
And so worst comes to worst, sometime in late June, early July, email me, and I'll send you the details. But also, Liz, what I'll do is when we re-advertise in early summer, I'll email you with the link to the website, and you can forward it on and promote it through the organisation. And I can assure you that issues around people with visual impairment will have been addressed by then, because I'm intent on ensuring that everyone has the best possible experience.
And if you need any advice on that, you know that, of course, NCBI, we have lots of staff, technology-wise or whatever, that can give you that advice on that accessibility.
Liz, can I close just by saying that, I really, really believe in self-employment being an option for people with disability. I think it's a huge untapped potential entrepreneurial market that is not being supported, and I'm just trying to offer people the opportunity to consider as a career. And please know that I'm not selling it as the solution to the problem of unemployment for everyone in the community, but it has got to be talked about more frequently by enterprise agencies, by disability advocacy organisations, and by government when we look at career options for people with disability. When I look at the comprehensive employment strategy for people with disability and note that self-employment is barely mentioned in the whole document, it shows where that notion of self-employment for people within the community currently sits in government thinking, and we've got to change that.
And you're certainly well on the way to doing that, Tom. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you for the invitation.
An absolute delight to have you here talking about this very important subject. Just to remind everybody that this is a recorded session, and it will be up on our website on NCBI's YouTube web link under advocacy, and within the next week or so. So please spread it widely, and we'll also have it up on our social media as well. So once again, Tom, thank you for your time today and all your expertise. It's been an absolute delight talking to you.
Thank you very much, Liz, and thank you to everyone who's participated today. Goodbye.